Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening. You know, I just thought that C.S. Lewis treats this in an interesting way in the Chronicles of Narnia, and that whole book that was a series of books that was made into a movie. And not to go into that whole plot line, but it's a fictional kingdom. And while the evil queen was in charge of it, it was all winter, it was all frozen and cold. And then she starts losing her grip on power, starts to thaw, and the good king starts coming, and the whole thing starts to thaw. And the image was like, I remember once the kingdom was called Narnia. That was the whole Chronicles of Narnia was this series of books that have been out for decades now. And I remember, I think in the movie adaptation, someone said, "Oh, you'd love Narnia in summer. Narnia in summer is wonderful." And that whole image of like, C.S. Lewis did this, he painted that picture really well. Like this whole kingdom that you're in is like under winter now. Like since the fall of the human race, right? Since Adam and Eve, and the Bible teaches that this world was created perfect, but then human beings messed it up. And we fell from grace. And ever since then, things have been messed up. But someday it's going to be restored. Right. But the idea like right now, but this is winter. This is winter. And you love it in summer. It would be wonderful. When everything is going to be restored, it's going to be great. And I think that's verse 21. The creation itself would be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. That's when summer's coming again. But right now, this whole stretch of time, since the fall of the human race and sin is in the world, this is winter. And that's suffering in the world.
I like that's a great picture of that. Thanks for sharing that. So what else do we see in these verses?
Well, there is a little bit of an eschatological view here. We're just talking about how little, we're not theologians. So you're the seminary degree, so you're more the trained theologian than I am. So you can weigh in here. I'll tell you my thoughts, and you can correct me. But there's a notion here, like that the creation, like I said, that winter, the idea of a winter, that this is under this season we're going through with the fallen world is like the winter, and then we're hoping for the spring and summer to come. But these verses are very interesting because it says the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. Like there's some future event coming, right? And then it says the creation is subjected to futility, not willingly. And so it's like the creation was created perfect. Everything God made was perfect. And then when sin entered the world, is subjected to futility. And then I'm going to skip to verse 21, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And the bondage to corruption, like you were talking about, there's decay in the world, there's earthquakes and hurricanes and all those things. But even like the second law of thermodynamics, how everything is going towards entropy, that the order goes to disorder, things fall apart. And that's what's happening in the world. And just this notion of creation, Greg, that this world is not the way it was supposed to be, that it's kind of fallen and broken, both in us, because of us humans, because of our sin, but also because of just the fallenness of the world now. So nature isn't even the way it's supposed to be. But someday it's all going to be set right, and verse 22, we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And the image here, I think, is like when Jesus was resurrected from the dead and he came back, he had a glorified body, right? And it was not, and I remember Mary Magdalene in the Garden of Eden didn't quite recognize him, and then she did. It's like he looked a little different, and then she recognized him. So slightly different, but the same. But then he had different physical properties. Like he walking through walls like they're not even there, right? But he was physical. He ate fish. He was eating fish with his disciples, right? So it's physical nature, but a different physical nature. And I think that's when I think first of all, when we talk, the Bible talks about we have the hope of a resurrection, a physical resurrection of our bodies after death. It's a great part of the Christian hope is that we will have resurrected physical bodies, just like Jesus had a glorified body, physical body, but with different properties, better, but a physical body. And I think about like what happened to Jesus maybe is an example of what's going to happen to all of creation. The whole of creation is going to be redeemed and brought back to the way it was supposed to be. I look, this is again, God reveals himself accurately, but not fully, right? But this passage is talking about some future event where everything's going to be great again, just the way it was supposed to be, like at the beginning of time when God actually created it perfect. And you could see, like, if I'm extrapolating from what happened to Jesus in his glorified body to all of creation, that the world would say it's still the physical world, but with the different physical properties, different, who knows what that looks like? The atoms and molecules of the world rearrange themselves the way Jesus or God wants it to be, but say, I'm going to make it back the way it's supposed to be. So if there was a way to talk about that, like if you're a physicist, you could talk about that accurately, that'd be nice, but God doesn't reveal that. I think the better analogy is to think about the winter to summer kind of analogies, an analogous way for us to think about and conceptualize that. But I think the promise of that is out there. I think these verses talk about that. The creation is eagerly longing for that. And it's everything's going to be changed, and everything's that's broken is going to be made right again. So,
in Isaiah, it kind of tells us a little bit about what that day is going to look like in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6-9.
Do you have it?
Describes the redemption of the creation in that day. It says you'll recognize this. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb.
Oh yeah.
The leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion will be together, and a little child will lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young ones shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like an ox. The nursing child shall play with the cobra, play by the cobra's hole. And the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, and the waters cover the sea. It's hard to imagine, that's just I think Isaiah gives us a vision of like what that might look like someday.
That's great, Craig. I'm glad you found those verses and brought them up, because you're right. That image of what it's going to be like in a redeemed, glorified world.
We live in a really, I keep saying this to my friends, like, it feels like the strangest times right now.
Yeah.
Like in my whole life, I can't think of a stranger time.
Like in what way?
Well, I don't know. Just everything seems upside down. Everything seems just weird. We seem like, and I don't really want to get into this, but like, I mean, I don't know, just the word, well, right now we're dealing with this inflation and
oh yeah,
economics.
And then the pandemic came through around the globe.
Yeah, the pandemic. I mean, people are struggling with more anxiety and depression than ever before.
Yeah.
There's a real feeling of hopelessness out there and despair, and it's palpable. Like, I mean, you just feel it. It's just, but what I love about, this passage is it gives us hope. Because it says that the creation, these aren't death pangs that the creation's having, they're birth pangs.
Yeah, right.
So in other words, we have a bright future.
That's right. That's right.
For the
just
believer. Like so we have hope.
Right, like a woman going through the pain of childbirth. That's the analogy in verse 22. It says the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. But it's like if you're a woman going through childbirth is still full of hope for what's to come. And that's kind of what gets you through the pain. But he's analogizing to childbirth to say that's what creation is going through right now, that kind of groaning. But then exactly what we were just talking about in verse 23, not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Exactly what we were just talking about a minute ago, redemption of our bodies. We're waiting for that day too, when we have our glorified bodies. And think of, as I get older, Greg, and all the physical ailments, things just start to hurt. Joints start to hurt, things start to hurt. And you look forward to the day when you're like be able to dance in heaven without things hurting, right? And
So true. It's so true. I mean, it's funny when you're young, you never,
I know.
well, let's put it this way. When you become our age, you look back and you think, man, I wish I would have appreciated no pain. Like,
Yes,
I wish I would have appreciated my body more
right.
when I never had any pain. But
Yeah.
now that I have this shoulder pain that feels like I've been having it for like a year and a half, yeah, it's hard to think of a day that goes by without pain.
Yeah, and they think, right, exactly, and you think they say we're going to have glorified bodies where those go away. Just the hope you have. And look, I'll make it real serious too. Like my father passed away last summer. Um, watching that body kind of to go, and he was over 90 years old, but the body really just giving away at the end, and mind giving away, and body giving away, and you start saying, praise the Lord that we're going to have glorified bodies in heaven, and all that's going to be, and to be, and all that pain and suffering is going to. But if you didn't have that hope, you just say, well, that's it. That's all you have. We're all just evolutionary accidents, and this is all you have, and then you die, and that's the way it goes. It's sad, but it decays, and it's over. And verse 24 here says, for in this hope we were saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. He's talking about hope and this whole idea of like, we're going through all this stuff and there's all this suffering. We're in winter, but we have hope. We have hope of what it's going to be. But I can't imagine how you cope with life if you don't have that hope. Because life is, for most of the world, life is pretty brutal and short. Life is pretty hard. And for most of human history, it's been that way, So if you don't have that, there's just deep sense of hopelessness, right? But just one of the most beautiful things about Christianity that it offers is this kind of hope for a redeemed body, redeemed world that we're going to live in.
When the Bible speaks of hope, it's a little different than what we speak of hope. Like the English word hope, generally when we use it, it doesn't convey the exact meaning that the Bible, like we say, well, I hope tomorrow's a nice day.
Oh, you mean like it's too tentative, too iffy?
It's iffy and very, very uncertain.
Yeah.
The biblical word hope is very much a certainty that's coming.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it has way more connotations. I mean, don't you see it here even? I mean,
yeah, I think, right. Then those verses I just read, 24 and 25, right?
Yeah, so it's important for us to think of, sometimes we, you have the same word like the word
Right.
hope, and
Yeah.
the way we use it in general, the way most like Americans use it, we use it in a very uncertain way. But biblically, the word is very, very certain. Like,
Yeah,
we
the distinct,
know
yeah,
God is going to right every wrong. God is
right.
going to create a new heavens and a new earth. God is going to resurrect our bodies. The
Yeah.
world is going to be made right.
And you can have total 100% assurance of that, right? Such a contrast. I'm glad you brought it up because it's such a contrast with some. If you say the average person, well, do you think if you died today, would you go to heaven? Well, I hope so.
Right.
I try to, be a pretty decent person. A lot of people worse than me, boy. Lord knows I'm not perfect. There's that, but I am a 6, right? And I hope so. I hope that's enough. But that's not what it is at all. It's a great contrast, Greg. You're right, because that's kind of that uncertain hope. But like Bible's saying, no, you have a hope, but the hope is made secure because it was bought with His blood, right? And when through belief in Him, you don't have to be iffy about it or tentative, or it's not just wishful thinking. It's bought and paid for.
I also like what Paul says here about how the Holy Spirit's working in our lives in verses 26 and 27. And in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness.
Yeah.
We don't know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express.
Now, do you think about that in your prayer life? Like I hear I'm praying, and I hope the Spirit is it. See, I don't think if that's really real, I don't think I think of that enough in my prayer life.
I
A
mean,
lot of times,
I've
go
thought
ahead.
about it before. The
Yeah.
way one of the ways I kind of look at this is like, let's say I need a new car.
Okay.
And so I start praying and let's say I'm asking God to give me a Mercedes.
Okay.
The way I look at this is like the way the Holy Spirit works is like, he filters out, he knows that me getting a Mercedes is not necessary. It's not beneficial. It's not
Right.
the answer to the prayer is, I get a Ford Focus or something like that.
Okay. For those of you who don't,
I've never
listeners who
owned a
don't know that
Ford
those are
Focus.
not the same thing.
I do not own a Ford Focus, but
That's right.
but that basically I heard a guy, a good friend of mine who I really respect. He said, you know what, you can pray, you can ask God for anything, but he'll filter out what, like,
So,
you know,
so Tim Keller preached on this passage too. The sermon, what's it called? Groaning in the Spirit is a sermon. He talks about that a little bit. And this is that you think about what you pray for, all the unwise things you pray for through your whole life. And wouldn't it be great if God would have that filtering mechanism where he would say, I hear what you're asking for, Greg, but if you knew how to pray perfectly for what you really need the most right now, what you really would be asking for is this, not that thing you prayed for, but this thing over. And that's what I'm going to give you.
now
And
don't you think that relates to this passage?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I think that, and thankfully he does filter intercede for that, right? So if you
Says
say,
we don't know what we ought to pray for. And how many
right,
times that we find ourselves in that situation? I don't even know how to pray about this,
yeah, don't
so
even
the
know.
Spirit intercedes for us. I don't know what to make of the groans that words cannot express.
Well, it's interesting. There's groans come up a couple times in this passage, right? There's the groaning of creation in the first part, and there's the repetition of the word groaning here as well.
And maybe the point of that is that, sometimes when we think of God, we think of him as like an impersonal force.
Oh yeah,
But this is emphasizing that no, God is personal. God is,
yeah,
in fact, he understands, like, he's the one who created us. He gave us mouths to speak. He gave us humans. We know what groaning is. We've all groaned at certain points. You
right.
can groan at my jokes that I told earlier.
we all groan at your jokes, Greg. Well, but to be serious, yeah, I think this is deeper to talk about. So when Keller was preaching on this, the example he was using, which I thought was a good one, was like after a battle is done and the firearms, the cannons are done firing, and then you hear the awful groaning of the wounded warriors in the battlefield, and you can think about someone groaning that way. And it's a great example. He comes back to it and kind of says, well, if you think about it, that kind of groaning, that's nice, but when did God ever groan for us? When was God ever groaning? You can say, yeah, we know what it's like as human beings to groan. See, there's also an earlier reference to women groaning in childbirth. I mean, so there's obviously that reference, but people go through pain, people go through suffering. We know what it's like to groan in suffering. What does God know about suffering? When has God ever groaned? And of course, what we know is that because we believe in a triune God, right? So we know that God himself, Jesus, who is God, on the cross, he said, to the Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? He groans on the cross, right? He was the one who cried out and said, it is finished. So he was the one crying out. So we have a God who doesn't say, who's not so far off and aloof from us suffering human beings. We have a God who's near, a God who has suffered just like we have, knows that. So the Spirit is a part of the triune God groaning for us. God understands what it's like to be in that kind of pain and groan for us. So I thought that was beautiful.
I actually think that Jesus probably groaned I think there's evidence, we could point to evidence that Jesus groaned like that during his earthly life.
Hmm.
Like when Lazarus was dead,
When Lazarus died. Yeah.
that there was, and he wept, like
Right.
there was a groaning. You could even say the rich young ruler, when the rich young ruler, it says that Jesus looked at him and loved him.
Yeah.
It's like he groaned because he
Yeah.
loved him so much, but he knew that rich young ruler was like,
Not going
we
to
don't,
follow.
we don't know the end of the story. Did the rich young ruler turn to Christ, or did he walk away and
He
just
had his
trust-
own self-salvation project, right? He had his own things he was trusting in. And Jesus said that like, went right to the heart of it. That self-salvation project you've got, the thing you are putting your trust in was his riches. Give that up. And he's not going to do that. So yeah, I think you're right. Oh, the other time Jesus groaned over Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem, Jerusalem,
Yeah.
how many times I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. The pain, the agony, like I loved you, but you didn't love me back. You
Yeah.
know?
So I think there's I think there's many examples in the Gospels where we see
Yeah.
the groaning. I mean, even the fig tree, when he cursed the fig tree,
Right.
you know.
You know what else I think is when he was on the cross and he remember how's that go? Where he was on the cross and they said he's crying out, and they said, "Oh, he's crying out for Elijah."
Or
Like, yeah, and I think, and I say, wait, let's wait and see if Elijah shows up. Like, I could just see him, like his arms are on the cross, he couldn't smack his forehead, right? So like almost like, oh, even now at this right at this hour when he's saving the world, still people still misunderstood, still so being so misunderstood by people. You could almost see that the groaning, like the groan of like, oh my gosh, even now people just don't get it, still don't get it.
yeah, that's it. It's very interesting. Well, we're about. Let's
Wrap it. Let's wrap it up there. We can pick up with 28 next time.
Okay.
Or we could pick up anywhere next time. But I think that's a really good discussion tonight. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.